That's when the politics of capitalism suddenly becomes meaningless to you. Capitalist politicians make everything sound incredibly complicated. So complicated that you need them to work it all out for you. You have a vote every 5 years. That ought to be enough. What more do you want? You don't really understand. You don't know enough. You're not smart enough. You couldn't really make the decisions. Well, medicine's complicated. It takes 11 years to train a doctor. We couldn't all be doctors. But who ever heard of politician college? What qualification do politicians have, which is beyond the rest of us? There isn't one, is there? Anybody could go into politics. The experts in charge of decision-making are not experts at all, no more than you are or I am. Let's get something straight here. Two men in a pub could bore and bewilder you for several hours with football talk, if you were daft enough to let them. But the rules of football are pretty simple. It's the same with politics. The universe of histories and details go on forever. But the basic rules of capitalism are quite easy to understand. And so are the consequences of those rules. It really isn't rocket science. And once you understand what the rules are, you're then in a position to ask yourself a novel question: whether you actually agree with those rules. Let's have a look at some of these rules or facts of life. See if you think they're complicated. See if you think they really exist or I've just made them up. Rule of thumb number 1. Very roughly speaking, 5% of the world's population owns 95% of the wealth. That's the land, the resources, the lot. That's about 1 person in 20. 1 person has all the wealth and the power, 19 have nothing very much at all. That's called the unequal distribution of wealth. It might sound unfair, it might seem unjust, but it's a fact of life and it's legal. That's not complicated, is it? Here's another rule, a golden rule. The people who have the gold make the rules. That's why it's all legal, in case you were wondering. Here's some more rules in no particular order. Rule 3. The more money you've got, the more you can make. Rule 4. The less money you've got, the less you can get. Rule 5. The poorer you are, the more expensive everything is. Rule 6. The poorer you are, the iller you'll be, the sooner you'll die, and the worse off your kids will be. Rule 7. The poorer you are, the worse your education will be, and the worse your job will be. Rule 8. The worse the pay, the harder the job. Rule 9. The opposite of Rule 8. The higher the pay, the easier the job. For example, company directors get paid, say, 100 times what a warehouse worker gets. But who goes home most exhausted? Rule 10. If you're really rich, you're a capitalist. You don't need to do any work at all. Rule 11. The poor pay for every mistake made by the rich. Rule 12. Rich people start wars, but poor people have to fight. Rule 13. Most rich people get rich by inheriting. Occasionally there's a rags to riches story, but they're vanishingly rare. Rule 14. Most poor people stay poor through hard work, thrift and sacrifice. That's enough rules. You decide, have I made these up? Am I just a cynic? Or do they sound like things that you've thought as well? You'd never get politicians saying any of this, that's for sure. How did all this come about? You might think it's always been this way. It hasn't. But I'd have to spend all day on the history and prehistory of the human race to prove it.
and we haven't got all day. Anyway, I'm not really trying to persuade you, only get you to understand what the point of view is. So instead, let's illustrate by analogy how it all started. I want you to imagine a nursery where 20 kids are playing happily. They have the odd spat now and again, but nothing serious. If you've been in kindergartens yourself, you can see how kids operate. They have arguments, they get over it, they work things out, often without any intervention by the supervisor. They're not skilled at diplomacy or people management, they're just doing what comes naturally. Now suppose that the nursery supervisor did a very strange thing and introduced a new kind of game. Except it's not a nice game, it's a rather sick game with sick rules. In this new game, the supervisor gives all the toys to one child. Let's call him Rex. And all the other children have nothing. They can't play with any toy unless they get Rex's permission first. Now, Rex has all the toys, and so Rex has something else too, a new thing that didn't exist before. Rex has got power. If other children want toys to play with, which they will do, being kids, they have to do what Rex says. By his ownership, Rex has power over them. From not being any issue at all, power becomes the central issue, the thing which defines all relationships, the thing that tells the children who they are. This power automatically puts the children in a separate class from Rex. He is the owning or ruling class. They are the dispossessed or toyless class. So, from a peaceful and more or less harmonious kindergarten, we've moved to a mutually hostile and suspicious class society of unequals. Pretty cool game, eh? But there's more. To play this game properly, Rex has to deal with a number of problems. Let's allow him an intelligence slightly in advance of the average 3-year-old. First of all, he has to devise strategies for keeping the other children divided amongst themselves, so they won't gang up on him. He won't keep power for long if he doesn't solve this problem first. Right now, the thing to do is to pick out the biggest children and offer them a deal. You protect me against them, and I'll give you some extra rights. It would seem to be in their individual interest to accept this deal. This small band of big kids can be Rex's police force against the toyless. In fact, they can even be his toy soldiers against the world. If any of the toilers get out of line, the toy police can soon give her a black eye and put her in her place. So Rex has invented a coercive hierarchy with himself at the top. So far, so good. But it doesn't take long before Rex finds it rather tedious to have to spend his entire time giving orders and organising everything. Why not hire some administrators to do it for him? Good idea. Well, now he's just invented a kind of coercive state administration, all to protect his property and his position. But it doesn't end there. He doesn't want pandemonium and endless arguments. He wants a stable working system with himself in charge. What he really needs is legitimacy. He needs to make the children believe that it is entirely natural, right and proper, that he should have all the toys and they have nothing. If they believe this, they won't see any reason to rebel. Rebelling against Rex would be as ridiculous as rebelling against the sun or the moon or the rain. So how do you make something seem legitimate? Answer: propaganda and persuasion. Rex needs to come up with a lot of propaganda to justify it all, which we can call a set of ideas, or an ideology of power. He then teaches this ideology in the kindergarten, in the new school lessons he has devised. We don't need to know what this ideology is, it doesn't matter.